Some Final Fantasy characters are hated because they failed you, and others are hated because they got you exactly where they wanted. That second kind hurts more, since the anger fans feel is really just proof the writing landed a blow they never saw coming. So the real question isn't who deserves the hate, it's which of these two kinds you're actually feeling. Sephiroth. He's ranked the greatest villain in gaming history, and mocked as the biggest try-hard edgelord in the genre, in the same forums, in the same week, using the exact same scene as proof. That is not a contradiction, that is the entire argument. The surface story is simple enough that anyone who has never touched a controller could follow it. Sephiroth was built, not born. Shinra pumped Genova cells and Mako energy into him before he could walk, aiming to manufacture the perfect soldier, and what they got instead was a weapon that eventually read its own file and stopped believing it was human. He snapped. He decided the planet itself was the enemy, and he set out to wound it hard enough to become a god. Then he walked into the Forgotten City and he killed Aerith. No warning shot, no dramatic monologue first. One motion, and one of the most trusted characters in the entire cast was gone. Players who were 12 years old in 1997 still bring it up unprompted decades later. That single scene did more to define his hatred than every genocidal plan combined, because it proved the writers were willing to take something a player loved and pay for it in full. That is the same well the whole video keeps drawing from, a hatred that means the writing actually landed. Then Advent Children happened, and the remake project kept happening after that, and Sephiroth kept getting more screen time, more callbacks, more slow-motion coat physics. Suddenly the complaint flipped. Fans started arguing he was overexposed, that the game leaned on his silhouette instead of earning it again, that One Winged Angel had been remixed so many times it stopped meaning anything. Every new re-release reopens the same fight. Is he still the villain who justified the hype, or has Square Enix just been polishing the same trophy for 30 years? Both camps cite the identical scene, the identical theme, the identical code, and somehow reach opposite verdicts. But at least you can point to why he matters. What about a so-called main character who could be deleted from his own game and the plot would barely notice? Van, a captain clearing his name and a stolen kingdom on the brink of war, then handed the camera to a 17-year-old orphan who wants none of that. That's not an insult. That's the literal design brief. Square Enix needed a younger face to pull in new players, so they built Van as the entry point, a street kid dreaming of becoming a sky pirate while everyone around him fights the actual war. The problem is, what happens once you're inside the game? Ash carries the weight of a dead kingdom. Bash carries a stolen identity and a decade of disgrace. Vaughn carries a grudge about his brother and a wish to fly somewhere else, and next to regicide and rebellion that barely registers. Players noticed fast. Data-mined scripts and cutscene logs show entire political arcs. The Resistance, the Senate, the Acurian manipulation, running without Vaughn doing anything to shape them. He shows up. He comments. He gets kidnapped once. The plot would survive almost untouched with him cut out entirely. And that's not a hot take, that's just what the flowchart looks like when you follow it. Compare that to a certain silver-haired antagonist from a rung back in this list, a man whose absence would erase the entire plot he built. Vaughn's absence barely dents a single cutscene. Early concept art didn't help his case. Vayne was reworked to look more conventionally handsome, more anime cover boy, less the scrappy Bujurbaan street thief the setting implies he should be. Fans clocked the mismatch immediately, a rugged political thriller wearing a teen idol's face on the box art. Here's the part that stings if you actually played all 40+ hours. You're not annoyed at Vaughn for what he does. You're annoyed because you kept waiting for him to matter, and the moment never came. Some defenders say his outsider perspective is the whole point, a fresh set of eyes to help newcomers track Ivalis's dense politics. Maybe. But a tour guide isn't a protagonist, and Final Fantasy XIII never quite figured out which one it wanted him to be. Being forgettable is one thing. But what about a lead who's impossible to ignore? One whose every line, every laugh has been mocked for over 2 decades. Tidus. Picture the most mocked 3 seconds in Final Fantasy history. A grown man standing on a dock, forcing out a laugh so fake it sounds like a car alarm going off in a foreign language. That laugh has outlived the game itself as a meme, clipped, captioned, and dunked on for almost 20 years. The problem is not that the scene is bad. The problem is that it was never supposed to sound good. Tidus is a star blitzball player from Zenarkand, ripped out of his entire life and dropped into Spyro with nothing but a sword and an attitude. He complains constantly, he picks fights with Auron, he sulks, he shouts, he acts like exactly what he is, a scared kid pretending he isn't scared. Next to a silent, brooding swordsman like Cloud or a Stonewall like Squall, Tidus talks too much and feels too much, and players hated him for it immediately. Now go back to that laugh. In context, Yuna is the one teaching. She tells Tidus about a practice from her own upbringing, forcing yourself to smile and laugh when you're sad, because sometimes faking it is the only way through. She asks him to try it with her. Tidus obliges, and what comes out is that horrible, strangled, entirely intentional laugh, and then Yuna joins in too. The awkwardness is not a writing failure. It is the entire point performed exactly as scripted. Two grieving people choosing to fake being fine together, because faking it is sometimes the only tool either of them has. That father is yacked, and the resentment Tidus carries toward him explains almost every immature outburst in the game. He is not whiny for no reason. He is a kid who spent his whole life being belittled by his dad and never got a real goodbye, dragged into a world where he now has to walk in that same man's footsteps. Some fans call that the most human writing in the entire franchise. Others just hear the yelling and check out. That split is the real story here. Vaughn got hated for barely showing up on his own screen. Tidus got hated for showing up completely loud, insecure, and emotionally unfiltered, every flaw dialed all the way up instead of hidden. One character disappeared into the background, the other refused to, and somehow that made people angrier. At least his flaws are just personality. What happens when a party member you're forced to travel with holds beliefs the game itself calls prejudice? Snow Villiers. A man saves nobody and calls himself a hero anyway, and Final Fantasy XIII expects you to cheer for it. Snow Villiers shows up shouting the word hero before he's earned a single letter of it. He wears the title like a jacket, and just like the jacket, it never comes off, no matter how badly he screws up underneath it. The pitch sounds fine on paper. Snow leads a resistance group called Nora. He's engaged to a girl named Sarah, and when Cocoon's government brands her a pulsatee and marks her for death, he charges in to save her. Bold, simple, heroic. Except charging in is exactly the problem. Lightning, Sarah's own sister, spends the entire game rolling her eyes at him for good reason. Every plan Snow makes is the same plan. Run forward, yell something inspirational, hope the consequences sort themselves out later. They don't. Civilians die in the crossfire of his rescue attempts. The military crackdown that turns Cocoon into a war zone escalates specifically because his group keeps drawing attention while accomplishing nothing. Sarah herself, the entire reason he claims to fight, spends most of the game turned to Crystal, completely unsaved. While Snow tells anyone who will listen that he's got this handled, he doesn't. He never really does. That's the part that separates him from a merely annoying party member. This isn't someone who trips over his own feet and makes you groan. This is someone whose failures leave bodies behind, echoing the same reckless pattern that already burned goodwill in an earlier chapter of this list, except here the wreckage is measured in lives, not just eye rolls. A player spends dozens of hours walking beside a man who insists he's the solution while the death count quietly disagrees with him. Fans still argue about what to call him. Some defend Snow as a lovable himbo, an oversized golden retriever who means well and grows eventually. Others call him a reckless poser wearing a hero's confidence with none of a hero's competence. Both readings agree on one thing: the growth comes far too late. 2-1-2 and Lightning returns. Both try to hand him nuance, consequences, a little humility. By then, the damage is done. Players had already spent one full game watching him fail upward, and a late-game redemption arc doesn't refund 40 hours of frustration. Snow wanted to be everyone's savior, and instead became one more reason fans point to Final Fantasy XIII as the point the series lost its footing. But Snow's failings are at least the kind you can forgive. What about a hero whose flaw isn't recklessness, but something the game openly labels as bigotry and asks you to travel beside anyway? Wakka. Wakka spends the first half of Final Fantasy X being one of the most openly bigoted party members in the entire series, and the game makes you travel with him anyway. He is not subtle about it. Wakka blames the Al Bhed for sin, for Mahina, for basically every wound Spira has ever suffered, and he says so directly to Riku's face. Not implied, not coded. He looks at an Al Bhed teammate and treats her like a suspect before she has done a single thing wrong. The laid-back blitzball captain thing makes it worse, not better. Wakka jokes, he laughs, he talks about faith and family like the nicest guy on the team, and then a Machina shows up and something colder takes over. That gap between the guy who ruffles Tidus's hair and the guy who calls an entire ethnic group heretics is exactly where the discomfort lives. Zero wink to camera. The game just lets him be that guy for hours. Riku takes the brunt of it. She saves the party's life more than once, and Wakka still watches her like she is one bad day from betraying everyone. Players are stuck sitting in that tension the entire early game, rooting for a party that includes someone actively hostile to one of its own members. That is a specific kind of exhausting nobody signs up for expecting a sports simulator with a religion problem attached. Then Yevon's lies start unraveling, and Wakka's worldview gets pulled apart with it. His arc is real. He questions the teachings, he questions sin, he slowly, painfully lets go of the hatred he was raised on. Some fans call that the most human growth in the entire game. Others think the apology comes too late and too quiet, that 100 small insults do not get erased by one redemption arc in the back half. Nothing about Wakka's prejudice is an accident or an oversight. Every ugly line was written on purpose, tied to a religion that turns out to be built on a lie, aimed at a character the story clearly wants you to respect. That is a completely different failure mode than a hero who just does not have enough personality to carry his own game. This is a hero with too much personality, and most of it is wrong on purpose, which raises the real question the whole thing has been circling. When a character is truly universally despised, is that the writer's greatest failure or their greatest triumph? The answer lives in the villains nobody defends. Other controversial characters. Somewhere in a Shinra lab, a man in a stained coat is taking notes on a woman's dying body, and he never once raises his voice. That is Hojo. No monologue, no dramatic flourish, just a scientist treating people like specimens because to him, that is exactly what they are. He engineers Sephiroth from stolen Cetra cells. He imprisons and experiments on Aerith's mother. He watches Cloud and Zack rot in tanks for years as part of an ongoing project, checking on them the way you'd check on a fridge full of leftovers. Every atrocity in Final Fantasy VII traces back to a man who never raises his pulse doing it. Compare that to Algus, the noble's son from Final Fantasy Tactics who sells out peasant soldiers the moment they stop being useful to him. He orders the deaths of people who trusted him because their blood is the wrong color on a chart nobody asked to see. Annabella Rosfield pulls the same trick in Final Fantasy XVI, smiling through court politics while quietly deciding which of her own children are worth protecting and which are expendable pieces. 3 different games, 3 different decades, and the exact same verdict from fans every time. These characters are supposed to make your skin crawl, and they do their jobs perfectly. That's the split. Nobody hates Hojo, Algus, or Annabella because the writing failed. They hate them because the writing landed a direct hit, built a person ugly enough that an audience across a decade still can't shake them off. Now put that next to Vaughn wandering through a war he has no reason to be part of, or Snow promising a village he'll protect it right before failing them anyway. Nobody wanted those two dead. People wanted them to matter, and the writing simply never cashed that check. Same word, same tier lists, same forum arguments, completely opposite crime. That's the trick this whole video has been playing on you. Hated sounds like one measurement, a single dial that only moves in one direction. It isn't. For every player who spent 40 hours resenting a hero who let them down, there's another who spent those same 40 hours chilled by a villain who never even bothered to raise his voice while doing something unforgivable. One of those is a broken promise. The other is a bullseye. Hojo proves the ceiling. Van and Snow prove the floor. And hatred, it turns out, isn't proof a writer failed at all. It's the only emotion in gaming that tells you, with total honesty, whether they hit the target or missed it completely, using the exact same number either way. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.